Okay, you're live now, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Thank you so much. Welcome everybody to the Subcommittee of Education Business Administration with the Budget and Taxation Committee. We're meeting today for the purpose of budget hearings. Appreciate everybody's patience. We wanted to make sure that we were live streaming, and we are now. So we're going to first start with the Department of General Services, and we'll start with the analysis from Patrick Frank. Before we do that, I just wanted to let the members know that I believe this is the last subcommittee meeting for the Education Business Administration Subcommittee. So I just wanted to thank all the members for their hard work and diligence. So with that, Mr. Frank.
All right, I can't seem to be able to share my screen. It says the host has disabled this for me.
Okay, we will enable it for you. Hold on for 1 second. I even try to share my screen and I'm not allowed. So you're in good company, Mr. Frank. Can you try it now?
Let's see. No, not yet. Let me keep trying.
Okay. We'll get to work on that. Senator King, do you have the analysis in front of you? The budget analysis? Okay, so why don't you just go through, I mean on your desk. So if you have it on your desk.
Yeah, actually, it just came up here.
Perfect. All right, let's go.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna, first point I'm gonna make is this is the operating budget here. As you can see in 2021, there's this very large amount of reimbursable funds. That's the CARES Act. And the reason for that is a lot of the procurement is moving through the Department of General Services. It's very unusual. And we'll talk more about that later. And with that, I'll next go right into the analysis. I'm going to go to cost containment. It was a difficult year, 2020, and in early 2021, the Board of Public Works made some pretty large reductions to the Department of General Services. What's interesting is they reduced $5 million out of the critical maintenance program. Also, 7 positions were abolished in the Office of State Procurement. And some of the highlights from that. Here, Exhibit 5, it shows spending by agency. As you can see, about half of the spending is facilities, operation, and maintenance. Those are the office buildings in Baltimore and Annapolis and throughout the state. Facility planning is about 16% of the budget. That includes the facilities maintenance money and the staff that does all of the capital construction planning. Facility security is about 16%. There's also Office of State Procurement, which is 8% of the budget, but has been very active this year. And we'll talk more about that as well. Object spending, about half of this agency is salaries and wages. Another 22% is contracts. So this is an agency it spends most of its money on its employees. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act does have one item in it that affects the Department of General Services. There is a $750,000 grant to the city of Annapolis. It's called a pilot or payment in lieu of contract. This was about $367,000 a few years ago. There was some legislation to increase it and to make it to give the inflationary increases each year. The BRFA once again is reducing that back to the old $367,000 level.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing all right.
Can everyone just make sure they're muted?
All right.
Mr. Frank.
Okay.
Yeah,
personnel data, I'm going to go ahead and kind of mention here that there's 7 positions that are coming in. What happened with, since the budget is better now, what the budget includes is those 7 positions that were abolished. They're getting 7 positions back now for procurement. And so that's kind of a deficiency appropriation, but it's more of a make-whole appropriation to get them back to the staffing levels that were envisioned when the budget was enacted. First issue we're going to talk about has to do with emergency procurements. As you can imagine, during a pandemic, there's a lot of supplies that the state needed very quickly. And what this shows is some data about how many emergency procurements there have been in recent years from 2013 to 2020. and also how much was spent on them. The green bars, as you can see, is the spending. It's usually maybe $50 million a year is a big number for that, but there are some $50 million years, and there's one especially larger year when there was a contract for public safety that was needed for the medical. And as you can see, just COVID-19 alone I think the amount's about 8 times more than it's been in the past, and also many more contracts. So you can see the effect of COVID-19 on the procurement program. Exhibit 9 shows the different kinds of things that were procured. These are the health procurements, which was about $1.2 billion worth of those procurements. As you can see, masks and ventilators were quite common. The multiple is generally things like masks, hand sanitizers, and gowns, and things like that. So those things that you use every day and need every day when you are out with the public is a lot of what really was procured here. One of the concerns that has been raised about this is that they use the emergency procurement process for this, and it is set up specifically so that the state can very quickly get procurements that were not anticipated. And as you can imagine, in this pandemic, there was quite a bit of that. But one of the issues here, you can see in Exhibit 10, is that the notification to the Board of Public Works and final approval of it took a little bit longer than is ideal. It's, I believe, 45 days after the procurement is when these items are supposed to go to the board. And this kind of shows that there were a lot of these procurements, and they did take a while to get to the board. Also, what happens is when you do it fast, it doesn't always work perfectly. And here's a list of canceled and withdrawn procurements through this process. And that's kind of the first part of this issue. There's a second part to this issue, and that has to do with the report that was done by the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. That's a new office in our department. And they took a look at emergency procurement, not so much from the perspective of a pandemic, but just the whole program, and took a broader view of the whole program in general. And that's the next few pages. I'm going to talk about some of the findings and observations that they had. The first thing I want to say is, I think there was an old adage I heard once. I think when Hollywood first started making movies, they used to say you can have it good, you can have it fast, or you can have it cheap. Pick any two. And I think that sums up what emergency procurement sometimes is in that the procurement process is set up for a couple of things. One is this first bullet here shows, is you want to have as much competition as you can. And that takes time. The bidding process takes longer if you're going to do that. But you tend to get more competition and better results, is it. Also, the state sometimes has some goals. That first part, I guess, is the cheap part. The second part is the state you want to do it good, that has some goals like MBE participation. And we found in emergency procurements is MBE participation tends to be lower. But the issue is, if you really need masks, hand sanitizer, things like that, you got to move fast. And so you may not always get what you want. And so I think moving forward, the question is, what can we do to have an emergency procurement process, but to have it also maybe to minimize it and to have it be effective also and a good tool, but that we use the regular process as much as we can. And so one of the issues here they found is there are a fair number of routine use of emergency procurements. What that means is like maintenance things where really, maybe if we did a little bit better with our maintenance, we wouldn't lose a boiler at a bad time and we'd have to quickly replace it. Also, what they could think about and what they considered is that the chief procurement officer doesn't always have to review or doesn't have to approve all the emergency procurements. Maybe having that step added to the process would be helpful. Let's see. Also, another idea is the idea of the expedited procurement. This is some agencies can do this. I think the Port and the Aviation Administration do this, in which they get pre-approval from the board for an expedited procurement. In many cases, this may not have been enough through the last pandemic, but at least having this in the toolbox may be helpful as kind of you don't have to go through the full procurement process, but it does have a little extra view on it. And finally, another kind of the last point I want to make, it has to do with improved maintenance. And there's an issue about maintenance later, and that is, it gets back to that routine procurement issue from earlier, and that, you know, if we were to had a better maintenance program, that we were more aware of what the age of things, when things are breaking down, we may be able to replace things at a better rate and have less issues. And so that's some of the points I think that were made from the study from the program evaluation group. Second issue has to do with state office needs and what are they going to be. I mean, it's pretty amazing that less than 1% of the executive branch workforce was working remotely a year ago, and now half are, and that's quite a lot. Moving forward, once the pandemic is over, people will be returning to work, but there's a good chance that this changed a few things, and that remote work is going to be much more common. And that's going to affect state office needs for a while. And the issue is right now is that we really don't know how this is all going to look in a year or two from now. But we think that DGS should be looking at this issue, should be talking to state agencies about what their needs are going to be moving forward. And so there's some narrative recommended to have them study this issue. And the final issue I want to talk about has to do with facility maintenance. This is a big part of the budget and a big part of the department's responsibility to keep up what we have. There is a new unit called the Building Assessment Unit. What this unit is doing is it's a DGS unit for employees, and they're actually going into the buildings to see what's going on, what the state is of the facilities, and trying to be more proactive. I mean, also there are initiatives to improve the software that the state has so that it's more integrated, so the maintenance is integrate with the repairs and things like that. And so, and there's some indicators I think that are kind of interesting. And what you see here is Exhibit 11, and the yellow part are the DGS buildings, and the green are the non-DGS buildings. What's interesting is there was a jump in facilities maintenance and stuff like that, and part of it may have been just the new unit is finding more stuff. And actually, that's a good thing if they're finding things, because what they're finding is already there. It's just the things that we don't know about. So I would expect some increases as they go through and find things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That means we just know more about what's out there. Like I said, there is a recommendation to have some narrative, to have the Department of General Services examine what the state's office needs are going to be moving forward. And then there's the standard appendices. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank, for that thoughtful analysis. Does any of the committee members have any questions for Mr. Frank? Okay, I don't see any, so we'll turn now to Secretary Churchill. Mr. Secretary, welcome. If you feel free to recognize your team, and then if you could just hit the highlights and just answer DLS's questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Zucker and members of the Senate Education, Business, and Administration Committee. For the record, I am Ellington Churchill, Secretary for the Maryland Department of General Services. And with me today is Nelson Reichert, our Deputy Secretary, Mike Hafley, our Deputy Chief Procurement Officer, and Lauren Buckler, our Assistant Secretary for Design, Construction, and Energy. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today in regarding our operating budget. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Mr. Frank for his analysis of our FY22 operating budget response. We greatly appreciate Patrick's hard work and understanding of our agency. General Services is known for our expertise in real estate, construction, procurement, and management of state facilities, including our government campuses and our district courthouses across the state. In addition, we oversee the State Energy Database, which is the largest and most robust of its kind, which helps all state agencies manage their utility cost and energy usage. An excellent example of our work in this last year, and actually in the last couple of years, has been the newly completed Lawyers Mall, which highlights our expertise of 4 of our divisions: the Office of Design and Construction, Facilities Management, State Procurement, and the Maryland Capitol Police. I would like to take a moment to highlight General Services' efforts in relation to the state's COVID-19 response. In addition to our normal responsibilities, the following are our continued efforts that we are performing. General Services Facilities continues to provide specialized cleaning plans, products, and services for state buildings. Our construction division has built over 60 temporary surge response hospital sites throughout the state, including the Baltimore Convention Center, which was completed in 10 days. General Services Procurement secured over $600 million in PPE through more than 150 contracts. And our department also acquired and distributed at no additional cost to the public more than $1 million in food, water, baby formula, computers, and medical supplies from the federal surplus program that we administer, which went to Maryland families in need. Our Capitol Police have screened individuals entering state buildings and administered temperature checks. And from 2020 to the present, the Capitol Police have screened over 200,000 people. And then finally, in our Office of Real Estate, we have negotiated leases for temporary medical facilities and for testing and vaccination sites. Our department works diligently and proudly every day to maximize its stewardship of Maryland's resources and to allow the state government to function efficiently in a safe and secure environment. Now, turning to the analysis provided by Mr. Frank, the department has been asked to address the following items. On page 6, DLS recommends that MFR indicators measure fiscal 2018 baseline energy consumption and compare that baseline for future years' consumption. Our department concurs with this recommendation. On page 29, DLS recommends DGS issue a report addressing the state's office needs and the operational changes therein due to the pandemic. The department also concurs with this recommendation to provide the requested information by December 15th of this year. We'll now turn our discussion points to the analysis which involves our Office of State Procurement. On page 19, the department has been asked to brief the committee on 3 topics. 1, why are so many emergency procurements were reported to BPW long after the required 45-day reporting period? Historically, we'd like to note that the state has treated the reporting of emergency commodity procurements the same as regular commodity procurements, which did not require to be reported to BPW. During this pandemic, however, DGS worked closely with the BPW staff and BPW liaisons to determine the appropriate reporting mechanism for emergency commodities procurements. There was an urgent need among all state agencies to address the threat to life and safety of the public, and this was paramount during the first 3 to 4 months of the pandemic. The health and safety of Maryland citizens took priority over our administrative task. Second item that we've been asked to address is the number and size of canceled or withdrawn awards. In terms of procurement, the pandemic response can be divided into 2 phases. Most of the cancellations and withdrawals were for contracts within the first phase of our emergency. And during this period, the market for commodities and services was extremely volatile. Purchase contracts had to be executed quickly and to secure materials for the state or losing them for our use. That was the risk. The cancellation noted within the report were due to vendors coming back to the state to inform us that they could no longer provide the materials contracted. The last item, actions that can be taken to expedite BPW reporting. The department recommends BPW be granted the flexibility to expand the reporting deadline in accordance with the severity and length of an emergency. Emergencies are complex and vary individually. There are mitigating factors that may not allow for the reporting within 45 days. This is what we saw this year. The department has also recommended raising the small procurement threshold so agencies can respond to urgent needs throughout this process. And this will reduce the procurement timeline and assure competition and transparency. On page 23, the department is asked to address the observations and recommendations of the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. I asked Mike Hafley, our Deputy Chief Procurement Officer, to provide additional context to the committee now.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael Hafley. I'm the DGS Deputy Chief Procurement Officer. DGS agrees with many of the OPEGA recommendations. Our detailed comments are contained in the DGS budget analysis response and also in OPEGA's published report. The report was lacking certain information thus not providing full context. For example, the average annual value of reported emergencies in the OPEGA report reflects approximately 0.00625% of the annual statewide spend, which is $8 billion. One recommendation requires the posting of an award notice for an emergency procurement on EMA as soon as practicable and within 30 calendar days. It also requires DGS to report an emergency procurement to the Board of Public Works within 15 days, which is unrealistic and provides no benefit. The focus in an emergency is and should be on the mitigation first. Another recommendation requires the CPO to review and approve all emergency procurements within 48 hours, which may delay contract execution. DGS does not support this recommendation. Legislation proposed in the report provides a revised definition of an emergency, as well as allowing the use of expedited procurement method for all state agencies. DGS does support this. As highlighted in the report, the Board of Public Works received 554 emergency reports, of which 549 were accepted, with 5 being remanded back. Of those, 4 were subsequently accepted and only 1 was canceled. For a complete review of the DGS response to the OPEGA report, please refer to the published report. And with that, I'll hand it back to Secretary Churchill.
Chairman Zucker, that concludes our remarks, and we stand ready to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Senator Elfreth?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, good to see you.
Good to see you.
We all obviously are here, we're state senators, but our work is also, our work back in the district is what's most important. And so I feel like it's a bit of like Groundhog's Day, but I have to ask about the Annapolis payment in lieu of taxes. It feels like the legislature mandated 750,000 back in 2019 that was supposed to go into effect last year. The governor's BRFA suggested that it should be halved. We put the money back in. It was halved in the BPW cuts. Now we're back at the BRFA suggesting that we should cut it in half again. And so, you know, again, Groundhog's Day a bit. Every year we have this discussion, and I'm particularly concerned this year because of the pandemic. It was always important that the state reimburses the city of Annapolis, the capital city, for the fire, the police, the EMS, the snow removal, all of the services the city provides to our state buildings. This year in particular, when we're talking about a pandemic, and in addition, the very, thankfully, threats that did not come to fruition, but the threats nonetheless on the state capitol building this year, where our, again, police, fire, and EMS were standing on the ready, cooperating in a wonderful way with Capitol Police, with Anne Arundel Police, with state police. That was an added burden to the city and the city's budget. And yet we're suggesting again through the BRFA, or the governor is, that we cut that payment in lieu of taxes back to a level that, you know, our legislation tried to address years past. So if you could just give me a little bit of rationale behind why the BRFA suggests we should, the pilot should be cut. That's a whole lot of acronyms, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to the public in advance, but Mr. Secretary, could you please give me some rationale behind that?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. And of course, you know, our department, the Maryland Capitol Police, work closely with the city of Annapolis on many combined functions. We support them and we enjoy their support. Our department is working with the Department of Budget and Management on this and a great many different issues. We do support the governor's budget, but we're happy to continue in conversation. And some of the items may be a little too involved, and I'm happy to take up some of your time, if you like, offline to talk about the issue.
Yes, please. It's a priority for my district. And Mr. Chair and colleagues, I will be asking that we restore that funding, reject the Bertha suggestion and restore that funding. And I'm gonna make the guess right here, that this time next year we'll be back having this same conversation. But I look forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Elfreth, and thank you for all the men and women in public safety in Annapolis who do so much, not only for the city, but for the state as well. Mr. Secretary, I had a quick question for you. So this is actually yesterday was the anniversary of when the first COVID patient in Maryland was hospitalized. And today, this evening, was when the governor first announced that there were three members of the public who were from Maryland who are COVID positive. So last year we had issues with PPE, the protective equipment. How is our stockpile now in the state? If, gosh forbid, we should have another, increased out, another pandemic, or this one elevates again. How are we looking with our state stockpile?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's a good question. Our frame of reference today is much different than it was a year ago, where we had virtually we were working from little to zero. Today we have stockpiles in place. The Maryland Department of Health manages that stockpile along with MEMA. And what we are seeing at this point is that it's not, there are stresses in the system in terms of certain items, but we're far and beyond where we were a year ago. We're able to get materials in. So there are stockpiles. And of course, if you'd like to get some actual numbers, I can work on, providing that to you. But I feel very confident about the supplies that the Department of Health are managing.
And then finally, because time is of the essence this morning, and I know we're on a tight schedule, but the committee is very concerned about the underperformance when it comes to minority business enterprises. I know this has been an ongoing struggle, and I don't have the new numbers in front of me, but I know last fiscal year was about 60 contracts that fell below the MBE requirement. And I believe that it was about 16%. So we need to continue working on that because it's unacceptable.
Again, a very good point. We're all working together cooperatively to move in the direction that's set by the aspirational goal of the state at 29%. I'd like to just I'll just be very brief. Of course, we look at a number as a year indicator. And there are things that I've addressed with the committee in previous years that still stand, that we have worked to move procurements into a better frame of reference. And if you would, we're presently at 17%, but the leading indicators for our contract management in terms of MBE participation is increasing year over year. And I'll just give you an example. And this would be something that we would be reporting on in the next fiscal year. But if we look at the last 6 months in terms of our overall contract allocation, of the 4 of the 6 months, we're at over 24% in individual months. So we're drilling down on a monthly basis on our contract distribution. That equates to, as an example, in January is $4.3 million in MBE contracts. In October, it was 6.1. In September of last year, it was $41.5 million in MBE contracts. So we're just not looking at the number from that's being spit out at the end of the year. We really have to treat this in the way in a serious manner to look at month over month gains within the system. And then lastly, I'll say we're trying to be more transparent, and any members of the committee can go and on our website, we're changing some of the things that you can pull down so that you can see what contracts have small businesses attached to it or minority businesses attached to it. You couldn't see that before, and that was just part of the system. So we're working with our Department of Information Technology on that. We thank them for that effort. And so I think we'll have a much greater conversation in the next year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We do appreciate you being here. Are there any other questions for the agency? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you to you and your team. Have a great weekend. And we're now Committee will now turn our attention to the Department of Information Technology. We'll start out with the analysis by Mr. Patrick Frank. Mr. Frank.
Okay, share the screen. Okay. All right.
We can see it.
Okay, here we go. Let's see. I'm going to go right to cost containment and talk about this. As you know, there was cost containment last year. Most of it for the Department of Information Technology had to do with reducing funding for some of the projects, the major IT project, and also some salary enhancements. And so salaries in major IT was where most of the funding reduction was. If you look at agency spending, this pie chart kind of shows you what the department does. 45% of its budget is for major IT projects. Another 21% is infrastructure. That's things like the Network Maryland. It would also include, excuse me. I'm sorry. Yeah, and the next part is 11% is for the Secretary's Office of the Chief of Staff. What that has is obviously executive direction, but also the major IT planning is in this. There's application system management, which is the things like the state's personnel system and the accounting system and those kinds of things. There's a radio program as well. That's the 700 megahertz emergency system for first responders. And finally, there's a security part of the budget, which it does cybersecurity and protects the state's system. Object spending, kind of interesting here is the big yellow and green pie pieces. Those are all contracts. That's about 87% of the budget. So 7 out of every $8 that this agency spends goes to contractors. And about 11% goes to the employees that manage the contracts. And so this is very much an agency that's heavy in contracts. What's also interesting is how the agency is funded. That's Exhibit 6 here. If you look at the operations part of it, and that's your infrastructure and your systems management and cybersecurity and things like that, that is funded mostly by reimbursable funds from state agencies that are receiving the services. There's also a large general fund appropriation, and that's for the major IT. So basically what we're doing is a lot of the major IT is funded through the general fund, and the operations are funded reimbursable funds to the agencies. On personnel, the agency has had some position reductions in recent years. The reason for this is that they've had some high vacancies that they just cannot fill. And so over the years, it's been like, so they lost a total of 25 positions last year that were abolished, and it's in 2021. 6 positions did move. That was the Telecommunications Access of Maryland program that provides services for people with hard of hearing. And that's moved on to the Department of Disabilities, probably a wise thing. That it was a good, and that's really good. HT really does those kinds of things and helps there. And also another 4.6 positions are being abolished. There has been some concerns about the salaries, and that's one of the reasons the vacancies have been so high, the churn has been so high. I've been told that the agency is working on a plan to reclassify positions, and there's some money in the budget for that. And so it's coming this time next year, there should be a new classification system, which should help with turnover for the department. As I mentioned earlier, major IT is a big part of it. I've got a chart that shows that all the numbers add up for this program. What I want to talk about now is the funding for this program. Over the years, if you look at it from 2013 to 2018, it's really $20 to $30 million is what the general fund share was. I went and looked back at 2017, and there were 11 general funded projects in this program. Since then, it's been really ramped up. This year, there are 27 general funded programs, and the general fund appropriation is over $80 million now. There's been, in recent years, a lot more money has been put into the major IT program in there for that. And there are a number of projects. Of the 27, there's an appendix 2 in the back of the analysis that discusses all of them. I'm not going to discuss all of them, but I will just want to mention a few of them. There is the MDH's, the health department, I should say, COVID link project. This is the contact tracing and things like that. What's happened, that project is being fast tracked. So it's not going through the normal process, but as with the COVID emergency, sometimes you have to move more quickly in order to get things done quickly. There is a project for the State Department of Education and the Interagency Commission on School Construction, their business management system. I bring this up because there's some, this is a complicated project. Also, it's very important for the school system to have this project. It's technically difficult, involves a lot of different agencies and things like that. So we're hopefully this is being watched very closely because of its high profile and because of the complicated nature of it. And I want to point that project out. The Controller's Office has a very large IT project, about $170 million so far has been planned for it. This is the tax system. Once again, with its large, we've got some annual language that we put in there so that they're reporting to us about how the project is moving along. A similar situation with the MD Think project in the Department of Human Services, a very large project. We've once asked for additional oversight to get regular reporting about what's going on. In the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, they've struggled a little bit with their IT. They've lost some federal funds over the years, and there's been some delays and some projects that they're still working on, some projects that should have been done a few years ago. We really hope that they get the proper resources that they need. They also have high turnover in their IT staff there, so there's some concerns there. And finally, State Board of Elections, we've raised concerns too a little bit about these. So we have some regular reporting with them, and as you know, we believe proper election is very important. In the out years, this chart shows spending for it. The green is the general fund share, and the orange is the total funds for these projects. So you can see the high level of funding is going to continue next year as well, as we expect over $100 million. Now, there is a decline in the green spending there, but I suspect that is just because of some projects are too early along. And then we expect like some things like the project for the IEC that I mentioned earlier, also the state's budget system, the accounting system will need to be replaced. So we expect, and we're expecting about $70 million a year annually in the out years in spending, even though it all hasn't been identified yet because of projects in the pipeline. Issue with the Department of Information Technology is just the whole remote work that's been happening. And this chart here shows how many people were working. There were 78 were classified as remote workers in January of 2020, and now there's over 5,000. And this is just the IT shared services part for the department. And so this is, the department had to move quickly to get people online and working from home and remotely, and they did. Next issue, probably the most important issue, has to do with cybersecurity. We've got some indicators that is part of the MFR here in cybersecurity. What I would point out in this chart is that the number of employees that are doing the awareness training, I mean, that has gone up from 72 to over 90% now, which is more where it should be. I mean, we think awareness training is very important. That keeps, you know, it's a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the hacks that happen because people aren't paying attention, and they open things that they shouldn't be opening, and things like that. And so it's very important to have proper training. Each year, the auditor audits all the state agents, or not all the state, but the share of the state agencies are audited. And there is an IT component to these audits. And I've been tracking this since 2015. And as you can see from the audit numbers here, their overall findings are down compared to what the average was. And there has been a downward trend. Also, it's positive, even though ideally you don't want to see any findings, of course, but at least the trend is in a good direction. I mean, one thing that we're especially concerned about are the personnel controls, that group. And one of them includes to have administration rights to too many people that don't really need it. And a good example of how that could be a problem is the recent SolarWinds hack that happened that was, I guess, disclosed in December. And what happened with the SolarWinds is a large corporation that develops a lot of software. And there's a number of different issues associated with that, and has to do with supply chain and things like that. But one point I would make is that one of the issues is that the administration rights were too high for these things. That once you got into the system, it had administration rights to the the servers that were using the system. And the problem with this is that if you have those high administration rights, you can do a lot of damage. You can very quickly get into a lot of different things. And that seems to be part of what happened. And recently the CEO of SolarWinds has acknowledged that this is a problem, and they're going to respond by reducing these administrative rights to, instead of having automatically have administration privileges, they're going to do what they call least privileged access. And so this is a real problem, and we need to work on these kinds of issues to make our systems more, to harden our systems, I suppose is a good way to describe it. There are some threats recently that have come up, and recently I saw a report that outlined, I think, 3 threats that were pretty interesting and relevant to Maryland. One of them is we have outdated technology and also lots of silos that gives you, it's harder then to manage the security in those kinds of systems. Also, there's a tendency for ransomware to target remote workers. It's more people are out there, and that there are more vulnerabilities now in the system. And finally, there is a tendency to look, in the cloud, because we're moving more stuff to the cloud, to find vulnerabilities there. And there are some vulnerabilities. I mean, even if the cloud is perfect, there is that space between from your computer till it goes into the cloud. And so there are a lot of threats out there, and there are some emerging threats. And so we've recommended some narrative that asks them to the Department of Information Technology to outline on what they're doing about cybersecurity and how they're managing this. And the narrative is here. That concludes my presentation. I've got about 20 pages of appendices back there, which I will not review. Like I said, all the projects are there. If you're interested in any project, you can go look into it, and I'm happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much for that very thorough and thoughtful analysis. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Frank? I don't see any, so we'll go on to the agency. We'll hear from the Secretary of Department of Information Technology, Secretary Michael Leahy. And if you could just hit the highlights and respond to the analysis, it would be greatly appreciated, Mr. Secretary.
Absolutely. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Michael G. Leahy, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Information Technology. I'm joined today by our Deputy Secretary, Lance Shine, the State Chief Information Security Officer, Chip Stewart, and Melissa Lehman, who is DeWitt's Chief of Staff. And I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to provide testimony to the committee. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Patrick Frank, our DLS analyst, for all of his hard work. It's always a pleasure to work with him, and look forward to continuing that relationship. So very briefly, Senator, during the COVID-19 crisis, DeWitt has been able to showcase its abilities to save state money, keep the state IT infrastructure security and secure, and roll out critical technology solutions that focus on improving interactions among citizens, residents, businesses, and the government. And just very highly, the highlights, we did create and maintain crucial COVID-19 websites, as Mr. Frank noted. We've developed a state-of-the-art contract tracing solution as part of Governor Hogan's roadmap to recovery. We've enabled telework and remote access for tens of thousands of state workers. And the statistics are a little misleading here because we talk about 46 or 53% of workers working remotely. If you look at folks that actually work in offices, almost all of them work remotely. It's just that, the other 50% of state workers do things in the field. So the corrections officers, the folks working for the State Highway Administration, typically are in the field, not in an office. So it is substantially all office workers that are utilizing the state IT's infrastructure. We've also integrated a number of crucial and time-sensitive applications into the one-stop portal in days rather than weeks or months, thereby saving the state millions of dollars and lots of time instead of taking on building a new system. And that has been the goal of One Stop since the beginning. And then finally, we have played a very major role in setting up communication systems for vaccine management, which allow us as a state to deal with more than 35,000 calls a day. And DOIT, and specifically the Office of Security Management, has made substantive improvements in cybersecurity over this past year. And I'm going to allow Chip Stewart, the State Chief Information Security Officer, to speak about those at this time. Please, Chip.
Thank you, Secretary Leahy. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Chip Stewart. I'm the State Chief Information Security Officer. The State Chief Information Security Officer role is to lead the Office of Security Management, which is responsible for the direction, coordination, and implementation of the overall cybersecurity strategy and policy for the state agencies in the executive branch. As Secretary Leahy stated, our team has made some substantial improvements to our cybersecurity capabilities over the past year. These improvements include network-wide vulnerability and risk hunting, an enhanced security operations center, improved incident response capabilities and capacity, scalable penetration testing, and cybersecurity assessments. Additionally, we've partnered with several law enforcement and intelligence agencies to gain information about the techniques, tactics, and procedures that our adversaries are using in an attempt to compromise our systems. Another one of our valuable initiatives is providing generally useful threat information and intelligence to the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, which is the Homeland Security Fusion Center in Maryland. This information provided to them is then disseminated to the folks that could benefit from it, such as counties, cities, and municipalities, as well as other states. This helps those organizations protect themselves against the cyber threats that our team has identified. So with that, I thank you for your time today and we welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your response. Does anyone have any questions for the agency? Okay, I don't think so. Mr. Secretary, we do have a quick Office of Legislative Audit overview, so you may want to stick on the call just in case there's any questions for the agency. But with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Mark Hagenbach. He's Audit Manager for the Office of Legislative Audits. If you could just briefly go through the audit. We do have to get to the floor at some point, and I know meetings are starting around 11:25, so you can quickly go through the audit. We'd really appreciate it, but we do appreciate all your hard work around the audit. So the floor is yours, and we see the screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mark Hagenbach. I'm the Audit Manager for the Department of Information Technology, or DOIT. And with us on this meeting is Brendan Coffey, who served as the Information Systems Audit Manager on the assignment. In the interest of time, I will shorten my planned presentation while still covering the more critical points of their audit. On page 2 of the presentation, we show some background information on DOIT. Basically, DOIT's responsibilities is setting policies, procedures, and standards, and overseeing the major information technology development projects, developing the statewide IT master plan, and coordinating, purchasing, and managing technology and telecommunication services to state agencies. Our audit report covers the period July 1, 2015 through May 6, 2018. The report dated May 1, 2020 contains 10 findings, 2 of which were repeated from the preceding audit report. And page 3 of the presentation summarizes the key findings that I will be discussing today, and some I will be cutting short, but if you have any questions, I'm certainly available to answer them. Our first 2 findings relate to the DOIT's role in monitoring MITDPs. On page 4, please. It begins with the background on major technology development projects, or MITDPs, which is a tongue twister. What is it? It is a project that meets at least one of the following criteria. It either has an estimated cost of at least $1 million, supports a critical business function associated with the public health, education, safety, or financial well-being of the citizens of Maryland, or otherwise the DOIT Secretary determines the project requires special attention. Now, DOIT has some critical roles and responsibilities in monitoring the MITDPs. As of June 30th, there were 47 projects with an estimated cost of completion of approximately $1.6 billion. DOIT contracted with a vendor to hire oversight project managers, which we call OPMs, to provide project oversight services. It should be noted that DOIT retains the ultimate responsibility over the OPMs as well as the oversight of the project. On page 5, we start with finding 1. And for finding 1, we tested 4 projects, which is shown in our audit report on page 10 in the audit report, not the presentation. The projects were the statewide personnel system for the Department of Budget and Management, the long-term support services tracking system for the Department of Health, the unemployment insurance modernization program for the Department of Labor, and Maryland Think, which is a shared human services platform for the Department of Human Services and the Department of Health. So for finding 1, we've reviewed DOIT's various monitoring procedures. And finding 1 states that DOIT lacks sufficient documentation that it effectively monitored the projects and did not always accurately report estimated project costs. DOIT has implemented certain procedures in order to monitor the MITDPs. For example, the agencies are supposed to submit or required to submit an annual progress report or an information technology project request form or an ITPR. We also have monthly meetings and other events scheduled to try to stay on top of these projects. Our review disclosed that DOIT did not document its or the OPM's review and approval of the annual ITPRs for any of the 4 tested projects. We noted discrepancies and omissions in these reports, which led us to conclude that the review appeared deficient. For example, for the Maryland Think project, the estimated cost of completion had increased by over $141 million from the preceding year, but no explanation was provided on the ITPR for the increase. And turn to page 6, please. Finding 1 also identified that DOIT did not require its vendor-supplied OPMs to document their review of the monthly project monitoring reports that are provided by the agencies. Our review found for 2 of the 4 tested projects, the monthly reports and related meeting minutes disclosed the action to be taken to address the risks were not always included in the reports or documented that they were discussed in the related meetings. Finally, finding 1 disclosed that DOIT did not properly report the estimated project costs for the Maryland Think and the unemployment insurance projects. Rather, DOIT understated the estimated cost of completion in their fiscal 2018 report for these 2 projects by over $64 million. On page 7, we show finding 2, DOIT had not established a process to independently evaluate the performance of the OPMs. And what I said previously is the OPMs are hired by DOIT from a vendor to basically be the oversight function for all these critical projects. Their responsibilities include reviewing and assessing project documentation, such as the ITPRs, communicating with all the stakeholders, contributing to DOIT's reports, and attending pertinent meetings. However, DOIT did not perform a performance evaluation of these OPMs to ensure that they're performing their duties. Consequently, DOIT lacked assurance that the OPMs were effectively monitoring the projects. Finding 1 and finding 2 represent the repeat findings in our report. In fact, finding 1 regarding the lack of sufficient documentation of project monitoring efforts has been commented upon in our 3 preceding audit reports. DOIT's written response, that's included as an appendix in the audit report, indicated several disagreements with our findings. The core of the disagreement seemed to be the level of oversight that DOIT believes is their responsibility. For example, they responded that DOIT primarily relies on the agency involved in the project to provide accurate financial data. As a result of this disagreement, OLA issued an auditor comment, which is also included in the audit report as an appendix. Our comment mentions that we continue to believe additional monitoring and verification efforts are warranted beyond those accepted by DOIT. Ultimately, in June of 2020, DOIT replied with a letter to OLA stating that they are presently engaged in a re-evaluation of the MITDP oversight processes, which OLA will review during the next fiscal compliance audit of DOIT. Page 8 provides some background on the statewide communications interoperability program, or Maryland First. It's a statewide radio system for communications between state, county, and local entities used for day-to-day and emergency communications. DOIT is contracted with a vendor for design, implementation, maintenance, and operation of the system. The contract value was $406 million. As of December 31st, 2018, 4 out of 5 geographic phases had been completed. Findings 3 and 4, as shown on page 9, Page 9, please. Thank you. Are related to DeWitt's monitoring of the vendor responsible for Maryland First. For finding 3, DeWitt did not ensure that the vendor met certain contractual requirements related to radio coverage, nor did it ensure contractual milestones regarding radio coverage were completed prior to payment. For finding 4, we highlight 3 examples where DeWitt did not adequately monitor the construction of a radio tower and ensure the payments were proper. On page 10, we show our information systems and controls findings number 5, 6, and 7. Certain security control deficiencies relating to the networks and computer sources under DeWitt's responsibility were identified. For example, intrusion detection and prevention system coverage did not exist for a substantial amount of untrusted network traffic flowing into the DeWitt internal network. In addition, DeWitt, in conjunction with the Comptroller of Maryland and the DBM, did not ensure that personally identifiable information, or PII, for state vendors stored in the state's financial management information system was adequately restricted. The PII was accessible to thousands of state employees. Finding 9 is shown on page 11. DeWitt did not enter into formal written agreements with participating agencies whose IT services it supported in order to clarify each agency's IT responsibilities and associated costs. And on finding 12, we show our other findings. Finding 8 was DeWitt paid a vendor without first verifying deliverables were met and did not monitor task orders. And finding 10, DeWitt did not adequately control its equipment inventory. Finding page 13 highlights our conclusions and recommendations. And thank you. I'm available if there are any questions.
Thank you very much for all of your work around this audit and the attention you gave this issue. It's very important. Do any of the subcommittee members have any questions for the Office of Legislative Audits or the agency? Okay. Seeing none, appreciate everybody. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Just briefly to the Secretary, it's an opportunity to respond. We heard in the budgets portion how the vast majority of your funding goes to contractors. If that's how your agency best functions, that's one thing. But we're hearing from the audit that there can be greater strength and oversight of those contractors. So can you just give us a brief response to that criticism?
Certainly. As you said, this criticism arose in a period ending in 2018. And I believe, and we'll see in our continuing conversations with OLA, that basically, as of December 2020, our status report on the implementation of all of the fiscal and compliance recommendations was made. We think we have addressed them. We have addressed the security concerns and believe we are moving forward with that. I think a big piece of the issues that we all face is that we are attempting, as the auditor said, to move away from siloed operations where agencies operate many of their IT functions independently and move toward an enterprise. So many of the things we've done in this past 2 years reflect that. And I think you will see significant progress in the next report. In terms of the issue about using contractors, the principal issue we face is that we just do not have the physical means nor the intellectual horsepower to internally keep up with many of the advances in technology amongst our own staff. And although we do have some significant recommendations in that area ourselves, for the most part, getting the ability to move quickly and agilely does require us to use contractors. The last piece is we do, because we have, as Mr. Frank talked about, charge agencies for the services we render. There is a change that we made 2 years ago now to charge folks for the actual services rather than having them have an IT budget that creates unlimited desires. And that is moving us along smartly toward folks actually thinking about the cost of the systems they're using and adding to the transparency. So there are MOUs for all agencies now. We have put that in place. And I'm not trying to be long-winded, but it's a huge question. And I know you're very interested in all of these aspects of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Cardin. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the agency, Department of Information Technology, or Office of Legislative Audits? Seeing none, great. Thank you very much to all today. I just wanted to again thank the subcommittee members for all their hard work this session. I believe this might be our last subcommittee budget hearing. Still a lot more work to be done, but appreciate everybody's hard work. And with that, that concludes today's budget hearings. Have a great day, everybody. We're adjourned.